Welcome everyone, John here from ContraBIM.com, where we create tools, templates, and tutorials for ArchiCAD and some of our favorite 3D modeling programs. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be talking all about how to create coordinates that we can use as points to relate essentially X, Y, Z values to locations for field layout. And so we're talking about what's typically known just as point layout. And it's the process of adding in coordinates to essentially give you those values for the X, Y, Z, so you can go and stake those out in the field and do so with very, very fine accuracy. So in today's tutorial, we're going to be talking about simply just adding points for some of our foundations in this example model here. But I really want to walk through some of the overall approaches to how to create these types of coordinates in ArchiCAD, as well as how to format the different reports so that when you export this, it's in a format that you can quickly modify so you can save it as a CSV file, because ultimately that's what we're going for here, is a CSV file that we can upload into pretty much all the big name brand total station controllers out there. So talking about Trimble and Leica, and there's a number of others as well, and they all basically are compatible with the CSV format. So okay, so again, we're looking at an example project here, and I've just kind of grabbed a few different types of points that I typically add in for self-reformed concrete type layout. But I want to show you real quickly here just some of the other points that we already have in this particular project. And I'm going to actually switch our background here from black to white so things stand out a little cleaner. Okay, so we have several different points that are already loaded up in this particular project. We have some monuments, which are really nice because you can take these points and you can just move them around. And if you have a CAD background from your survey engineer, all you have to do is just place these in 2D, snap them right to your CAD background, and then adjust the height accordingly. Right now these are all set to 0, but you can see as we move these coordinates around, these values are going to be modified depending on where this particular coordinate point is located. So okay, let's go in and let's check out our object selection dialog settings. And so just one quick note here is I am using the coordinate dimension 17 library part. It's one that I've actually saved off to one of my local embedded libraries because it's from a legacy version. But the reason I'm using this is it actually, for me, it's always worked the best. I think some of the newer versions over time have not quite had the same custom settings here. And yeah, the 17 version, for whatever reason, was always the easiest for me to get to work and to provide the points necessary in a format that was that worked for or that was compatible essentially with my Trimble total station controllers. So so just some of the highlights here on the settings. Again, wherever these points are located in your project is always going to be based around your 0, point. So in this project, my A1 is my 0. We can look at that in a second here, but we can see because we're in the negative X direction, we're at negative 10 feet. In the negative Y direction, minus 10 feet, and we actually dropped that down manually about almost a half a foot, a little over half a foot. So and of course we can adjust all this from right here as well, or we can manually plug in our Z value. But on that note, one thing that's really kind of important to understand here is what coordinate system we're actually using. And so in this case, we are using our project coordinates, which again are based all around our 0, point. But we could, if we had this project located correctly based on world coordinates, we can modify those and use our latitude and longitude. That would require another step of going in and actually providing the location of your project and making sure that your angle and your elevations are all set up accurately. So with our project coordinates, it's a little bit more dummy proof in my experience, and it really gives you a nice visual feedback just knowing if your 0, point is say your southwest corner every single project, then if you have a positive X, positive Y, positive Z, it's really easy to understand where those points are coming from. So, okay, so with that, let's, I just want to hit on a few settings in the custom settings here. And really the two main things to really think about are we have our 3D stamp, which is what we're looking at here in our preview, which allows you to turn on and off specific elements of the stamp to be displayed in 3D. So before there we had our X, Y, and our Z turned on, which because I probably wouldn't have too many monuments, I might only have maybe 2 or 3. Typically, you know, that's a maximum of what I would see on most projects. It's okay. I could leave these on and know that I'm not adding a lot of weight to my project by adding all these additional values in 3D. In 2D, I can control it the exact same way if we go to our 2D symbol, and we can turn those again on and off. I actually turned off, in this case, I turned off my show ID, which is the one of the 2 components that makes up the header. There's also an additional text here, and then you can plug that in, which essentially is a suffix. But you can see that will be added there at the end. But in this case, I'm not going to have that turned on, and I would just leave all my X, Y, and Z coordinates turned on as well. Okay, so yeah, the 2D and 3D stamp are really kind of important to go in and customize depending on what settings you want to see in either your layout or in 3D when you're creating these points. And there's several different settings here to really go in. You can change your text, and actually your I think your 2D font is the type of text for the 3D header as well. But you can go in and play around with all these settings. There's quite a bit to it. I'm overriding all of these with just an override surface. That way I don't have to go in and really mess with the individual surfaces for the different components. But you could go in there and change those as well if you wanted. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it in these settings. You could definitely go through and look at those a little bit more detail. There are a few different types of 3D markers we can add, whether a pin, pyramid, or a cone. And then there's also different 2D markers, whether you want a just crosshairs with a circle or crosshairs in a circle, and of course we can control these individually. So that's pretty much it for the intro to those points. You can find this version 17 just by going into your the basic search here, and you can get it to pop up in the search when you look for the legacy objects there. And okay, well, let's take a look now at the schedule that we have set up. And so the first thing I want to point out is when you're exporting to a CSV format, there's really 5 main columns that you really need to pay attention to and have formatted correctly. The first is the name column, which is the unique name element to be very, very conscious of. A lot of the times you cannot actually have 2 of the same name when you go to load that up. Most controllers require that your name be unique, so that's one thing to definitely pay attention to. And you can actually go through at the end, even in Excel, and make a modification to this if you need to. But something, yeah, you definitely need to troubleshoot if you happen to have more than one layout point with the same exact name. And then the next 3 columns here is our X column, which actually all 3 of these are actually being pulled in through our fields, and these are actually coming from that specific library part. So if I go to my embedded library, if I went to my layout coordinates, and we could see here, we could find our X, Y, and our Z. So those are the 3 values that we're pulling through here that represent that individual coordinate point. And then we do have a few other parameters here that we have set up. Some of these are customized through our the property manager. So the group, the trade, and the description are all from the property manager. The name here is actually the element ID, is what that essentially is. And then I've also added my home story here just as one more reference, just to provide some organization and structure to this report when I'm viewing it in ArchiCAD. So, and then in terms of criteria, all I'm doing is looking for that object that is that control point under my layout points. So that's the main thing that I'm looking for. Okay, so we certainly have different options here for organizing how we view this particular schedule. Right now, we're viewing our header as our group, which essentially is our unit format. We could also just organize this around by trade. So if you had different responsibilities to assign to your surveyor versus, say, some of your other trades, for concrete or masonry, or typically concrete lays out masonry in most cases, but yeah, we can break these all out by trade and add additional criteria if we only want a select group of points. So, okay, let's go back now, and I think we covered the major basics of the settings of the particular points. So I do have several points set up here. It's actually funny that one really, I think I modified that when I didn't want to. I think I might have had 2 of them turned on. So let me go in here. I'm going to change the stamp content. I'm going to turn off, turn it on, delete it, turn it off. Okay, there we go. And hopefully that didn't show up on the 3D. Probably did show up on the 3D. Yeah, it did. Something maybe you can cut out of this video, John. All right. Okay, so yeah, we have a few kind of predefined categories of layout points, and so what I would do is, and actually one thing that's really important to point out before we start modeling here and before we start dropping these around, is the settings of our X, Y, and Z coordinates. So with this particular library part, the format of these particular coordinates, we're obviously right now we're in decimal feet and we're with 3 decimal places. So that's really important to note, that we want to have at least 3 decimal places. 4 I think is unnecessary, but we want to at least go to 3. And if this report gets generated under feet and inches and fractional inches, it will typically not work for loading through a CSV format into a controller. Typically, my experience has always wanted the decimal feet and at least to the 3rd decimal point. So if you aren't are familiar with changing your working preferences, we go to our project preferences and go to our working units. And what's important to note is our dimensions and our working units. The parameters of this object are all based on the working units, not the dimensions units. So whatever working units you have set when you go to create these elements is the working units that's going to be appearing in our report. So even if this was set to feet and fractional inches, if we had set that to that and we started drawing with these, it would start populating our report with those in feet and inches. And just to show the point of that, let me we'll do that for sake of argument here. I'm going to just take one of these, I'm going to copy one, and I'm just going to rename this to feet, inch, and let's see if that pops up and is correct that it's in feet and inches. So foundation, no, that's not it. Yeah, feet, inch, we can see right there 10 and 9 30-seconds inch. So because if you do forget to change your settings here, I did find a workaround that's been pretty handy, and that is to if you actually go to 3D, and if we change our settings now back to where we need it to be, which is under decimal feet to the 3rd, if we change that and if we go back to our layout, it actually won't update. It'll still remain on feet and inches. And so the workaround there is just to modify the value here. So sometimes I just push it up a foot and then push it back down a foot, so it's at that same exact location that it was before. And just by doing that quick modification, it will actually update that, and that foot and inches will now be based off our latest project preferences that we had in our working unit. So that's the workaround there. And if you do find that you had the wrong settings when you were adding these values in, or when you were creating your points, you can always go back and just grab all of them. You grab every single layout point in your entire project, push it up a foot, push it down a foot, and as long as you're on your right settings here under your project preferences, then it's going to redo all of those. So, okay, so with that, let's go ahead and we can take, why don't we just add in points for this this A line right now. We'll just add all the footings in real quick. So what I could do is I could just grab my foundation 01 and we could do a move and drag multiple copies. And the point that we always have to be moving these around by is the point right at the bottom of the cone there. So that's where we need to start, because that's the one that actually reads the values. And so what I would do is I'd come around and I'd just start snapping them in here to each of the elements, or each of the locations that we really need. And to do this, I actually like doing this in a wireframe, because we can't necessarily, the way ArchiCAD works with the grabbing points, you can't necessarily grab that point through other elements. So if we had beams and slabs in this case in our way, it actually wouldn't let us snap right to those points, you know, specifically the lower ones here. But if we actually change our view to a wireframe view, then it actually allows us to snap to all those points. So when you're adding points for layout, it can certainly be helpful to have it in wireframe, is what I've found. So again, we're going to be doing drag multiple copies, and to prove that point there, oh, messed that up. So move, not drag a copy, let's do multiple copies. So from there, again, we'll just kind of go right around and cutting through slabs and beams, and just really easy to add these points in. So I'm sure with the Rhino Grasshopper connection, we could create these automatically just by setting that up to auto-generate objects. But we can create these really pretty quickly once we grab all the ones that we need. And I could either copy all these at once if my footings are the same, and use the 3D view here to snap them if there was a difference in elevation, or you know, if we had a sloping project that was at a you know, a consistent slope, we could even do a increment and multiply. So we can snap using our grids here, go exactly 18 feet, take it our distance here, and if we did have a slope, we could certainly adjust that right there. But yeah, with that, we'll just snap these in. Maybe I'll grab one of these and get the bottom corners of our grade beam here. Take both of these, copy it down to the other end, and let's finish this out real quickly. We'll just finish this line. So I'll do a few quick manuals. And I could undo all those real quick, redo them. It's a trick I use all the time for just reselecting. Sometimes it's easier than trying to select them otherwise. And okay, so let's just finish this out. Do the same thing that we did there. Okay. So, all right, so now that we've created all those points, we go back to our schedule here, and we can see all those foundations 001. But if you remember, I mentioned earlier that our name needs to actually be unique. So we can actually do a real quick trick here, and you may have seen one of my previous videos that was using the element ID manager. We're going to actually use that tool right now, and I'm going to pick up my find, and I already have this criteria set up of the name being my coordinate dimension, description being footings in this case, and inside my marquee. So I'm going to pick all of those up, up here under my document, listing extras, we can go to our element ID manager, and I can just change this to essentially I want foundations. A line is why I'm putting an A in there, and then I'm just counting from 001. So I already had that set up. So let's just go ahead and we'll just change all these IDs. And okay, so yeah, all the way through 72, starting with 1 down here. That was the first one we created, and since we created those in that order, that's essentially how all these were added in and numbered by the order that we created them. So a little trick with the if you want to do this in a different order, you can actually manually select them, and the order you select them, it will actually, that's how it will do that numbering or auto renaming. But okay, so with that, let's come back here now to our report. And okay, so we have all these values in here. Because those footings were all centered on grid, we can see real quickly that everything has a 0.000, and if I scanned right over that really quickly, if I did have anything that was slightly off, we'd actually see that coming through in those numbers. Like this particular one, that 841, that jumps out to me, but I bet if I go and look at that, that's probably one of these originals, or sorry, one of the examples that I brought in. So we can actually go ahead and delete all of these. And okay, so if we go to 3D, we can see we got all these values in here. So yeah, just by adding all these coordinates, it essentially gives us a listing of every single point of interest, in this case bottom of footing. So we could use that for not only layout of the excavation for those footings, but we could also use that for establishing or measuring the elevation of the bottom of that excavation. So you could use that as just a secondary control to make sure that those footings are at the correct elevation. And okay, so I think that's probably enough points that we've added in there. Let's go back to our CSV01 layout points. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close this. Don't want to save that. And I'm just going to go to my publisher here, and I'm just going to publish these sets of points. So there we go. And I'm going to pull up my folder, and let's just open that CSV01 layout points, which is named that just because that's the name of my publisher here. And if we pull this up, we can see, okay, we have our trade, our group, and our home story. These are the three that really play no role in the data that gets loaded up into the handheld. So we can actually just simply delete those to clean up this whole file set. I always clean up the top value here, and we could go through and we could delete out each one of our headers to save a little time here. Actually, there's not too many here, but if say we had a different format, I'm going to redo this actually. Let's go back here and say if I wanted to look at my report based on my group instead of my trade, maybe I'd have several more headers here. And if I wanted to export this in a format that was a little bit easier to clean up, where I didn't have to go through and manually delete those headers, I just turn that show headline off, and then we can publish this again. And let's open that up. Oh, there it is. There we go. And okay, so we can take those three and delete those. We'll delete this top one because we want our data to be starting essentially at the top of our column set. And so we could do a real quick visual check to make sure that we don't have any of the same names in here, because if you do have the same name twice, it's going to give you an error when you try to load it up. Your footings can be all the same, or essentially groups of coordinates is this is how that can bring it through depending on what controller you have. But we have one final step here actually before we save this out as a CSV, and that's actually and this might depend on the settings that your controllers can import. But what I've noticed in the past is we always need to take our foot symbol and replace it with just a space. And if we replace all of these, that gets rid of that foot symbol, and I believe that's how most controllers want to read this information. So we also, now that we've done that, it actually changed the formatting of those cells. So I'm going to push this over and make sure I have all three, and just because it got rounded out earlier, it still retains those full values all the way to the third decimal, which is important to note. And okay, so I think that's pretty much it. So at this point, I would just do a file save as, and what I'd be saving this as is we would want to do a CSV file. We actually have a few different versions of them here. There's a CSV UTF-8, which is a comma delineated. There's another one down here, the CSV comma delineated, which is probably more of the standard, I would think. And then we also have a few others. There's a Macintosh version and a MS-DOS version. So I think it's typically the basic CSV is the one that's worked for me in the past. And so all I would be doing is just doing saving layout points. And I always kind of like put in my date in here. So today is 7/22/2018, and so that just tells me that that's the date that I'd be loading those points up, the last published. So okay, so we could just save that, and it does ask you here, some of the features might be lost if you save to that format. Do you want to keep using that format? We can just hit yes and continue, and you'll see at the top it actually maintains it as a CSV. So okay, well, I think that pretty much wraps up all the items I wanted to cover on this workflow. Yeah, it's a really powerful workflow. I think being able to actually take points and go lay things out in the field, whether it's complicated arcs and radius type work, or whether you just want to add points in to go out and verify that the work being put into place in the field is accurate and as planned. If you're a self-performed trade, such as concrete or steel or any MEP or a framer, then being able to quickly add points into your coordinated model and have access to compare those points against any of your latest design documents or change documents over the course of the project. Yeah, having all this information all in one place in ArchiCAD. A few other tools actually work in this same manner. And so that's why, for me, ArchiCAD is quickly become my go-to for adding layout points. It's just pretty easy, and I'm sure with a little bit of tinkering around with the Rhino Grasshopper connection, we can get all these points to be automatically created just by having it go through and pick out the elements and then adding points at the corner nodes. So okay, well, with that, I'm going to wrap up this video. Thanks for checking it out. Hope you learned something that's useful for your own projects. And if you have any questions, then please just leave a comment down below in the comment section, and I will be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. And yeah, thanks again for watching. If you have more questions or want to learn more about what we do here at ContraBIM, check out our website, www.contrabim.com. And all these files, these templates that we're using, are all available to our network. So if you're interested in using any of these files or reports, training files, or everything that we do, all that is available to our network. So definitely reach out to me if you're interested in getting hands-on with this type of template and workflow for construction management. So okay, signing off here. I will catch you on the next video. Thanks.